In Miami, a university football player and his female friend are found beaten to death. Investigators piece together random fragments from the crime scene, hoping to assemble evidence that will point to the killer. A man is found shot to death in his living room. With no obvious suspect, investigators turn to those closest to the victim and uncover a startling secret. When killers are driven by jealousy and desire, their desperation is evident in both the crime and their efforts to avoid detection. But forensic science can reveal even the slightest mistake. To solve crimes of passion. Sultry Miami Beach, with its hot nights and warm days, is the perfect setting for romance. But when passion is one-sided, jealousy and rage can lead to murder. On April 16, 1996, University of Miami student Darren Thomas was returning to the dormitory he shared with star linebacker Marlon Barnes. Thomas saw that the tires of his SUV were flat. He had just loaned the car to his roommate. Annoyed, he wanted to confront him. When he went into the dorm, Thomas was horrified to find Barnes lying on the floor, covered in blood. He ran next door to call police.
Miami-Dade County Police and Fire, where's your emergency? University of Miami? What building number? Room number?
A patrol officer and an ambulance were immediately dispatched to the apartment.
Attention all units, 332, University of Miami Athletic Dorm. So now if there's a subject on the scene at 1901, Kilo 3105.
Paramedics entered the scene. Marlon Barnes lay motionless on the floor.
Do you have a pulse?
He'd been severely beaten about the head and face. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the bedroom, the officer found another victim.
There's a female down, detectives.
A young woman, also badly beaten. Despite efforts to revive her, the victim's vital signs remained weak. Medics needed to get her to a hospital immediately. Crime scene investigators arrived and began to carefully search through the apartment, looking for clues. It was eerily undisturbed, suggesting that robbery was not a motive for the attack. Investigators found splinters of wood and shards of metal near the front door. But the wood pieces did not seem to match any of the furniture in the apartment. It may have come from the murder weapon. They also found fragments of teeth and bone. Testaments to the savagery of the attacks. Investigators interviewed Darren Thomas. He identified the female victim as 22-year-old Timwanika Lumpkins. Unfortunately, she too would not survive. Barnes had borrowed his SUV to attend a party at a Miami nightclub. He was not aware of anyone who would want to attack Barnes or Timwanika. At the Miami-Dade Police Department, Detective Thomas Romani worked the case. From his early assessment of the crime scene, Romani knew the victims were caught by surprise.
We were able to establish that the attack was with a heavy blunt object, and it took place right at the front door and proceeded into the house, and the majority of the trauma sustained to Barnes occurred when he was on the floor.
The victims were autopsied in Dade County. The examination revealed that both victims died as a result of blunt trauma. Barnes and Timwanika had been hit with such force that impressions of the murder weapon were left on their bodies. Medical examiner Sam Galino noted the distinctive nature of the victim's wounds.
Marlon's wounds were predominantly clustered around his face. Some of them were T-shaped or L-shaped, or had some unusual contours to them that made me think that they were made with some sort of very specific weapon. Timwanika had some pattern injuries, but they were subtle and they were different, indicating that either it was a different weapon, a different aspect of the same weapon, or possibly that the weapon had somehow altered, such as being broken between when she was assaulted and when Marlon was assaulted. But the bigger mystery in both of the cases was there a specific weapon that we could identify and match to these wounds?
The task of identifying the murder weapon would fall to the Miami-Dade Crime Lab. Thomas Quirk is a firearms and tool mark examiner at the lab. He studied evidence taken from the scene.
I could tell by looking at the wood that it looked like what's called a forend of a shotgun. That is a part of the shotgun that's usually held by the left hand when somebody's firing a shotgun.
The brutality and rage of the crime suggested the killer knew his victims. The next day, news of the campus tragedy stunned the city. Detectives would have to develop leads on a suspect. Investigators met with the victim's close friends and teammates. Barnes and Timwanika were popular and well-liked by their peers.
I saw him at the Club Salvations.
The football players told us that Barnes and Timwanika were seen together. Not all of the football players knew their exact relationship. Timwanika was a friend of Marlon Barnes since they were in high school.
Miami-Dade police also discovered that Timwanika had an ex-boyfriend, a rap musician named LeBrant Dennis.
LeBrant Dennis was a local of Miami. He had produced some rap videos, and in fact, that's how Timwanika and LeBrant Dennis met.
Police were eager to question Timwanika's ex-boyfriend, LeBrant Dennis. And they wouldn't have to wait long for answers. The day after the murder, Dennis and a friend showed up at the police station.
And her boyfriend. I need you to research through that, see what you can make out of it.
The ex-boyfriend of the girl was murdered, Barnes. He's outside, he wants to talk to you.
Oh, good, very good. Okay. You come out there with it too. Very good.
Detective Romani was intrigued by what he found out.
When I met with him, he didn't have that gangster, rough rap type persona, and I didn't pick up on it. LeBrant was very calm. He was inquisitive as to what occurred. He told me that he didn't have any information about the case. Had you ever had any problems in your relationship with Tanganyika, domestic problems? He gave me some background information about his relationship with Tanganyika, why they broke up. He, in fact, told me that he did not personally know Marlon Barnes. Had you and Tanganyika
Dennis and Tanganyika dated for 5 years.
Up until a week ago, we moved out of our
There had been some breakups between them through their 5-year relationship as well.
But according to Dennis, things were getting better between them.
Out of your cousin's house?
Yeah.
They were in the process of reconciling.
We worked in the same place. I've seen pictures of it and stuff like
He said he was asleep at his sister's house the night of the murders. Investigators asked to take photographs of his body. Police wanted to see if Dennis had any marks or scratches, signs of a physical altercation.
Tom's, yes. Thank you. Can you take off your shirt, please?
But no visible scratches or bruises were found on his body. Dennis also agreed to be fingerprinted. He was acting like a man with nothing to hide. Even though there was nothing glaring, Detective Romani wasn't convinced.
When I was told that LeBron Dennis responded to the Homicide Bureau to speak to me, I wasn't really surprised, but I was apprehensive. Maybe that he was coming forward to be too helpful. It became clear that he was trying to be very helpful.
Miami-Dade investigators went to Dennis's home. He continued to cooperate. They conducted a thorough search.
We're going to ask that you wait by the door here, okay? We're going to just look in your... Okay.
Looking for anything that might be related to the crime. They found nothing out of the ordinary. Detectives asked Dennis for the clothes he had worn the previous night. The clothes would be examined for traces of blood or hair and fiber evidence, but nothing would be found. They also searched and photographed Dennis's car. But again found nothing suspicious. Despite the lack of evidence, police could not eliminate him as a suspect. Detectives had to expand their search if they were to solve the double murders, and they would need hard evidence to bring the killer to justice. Detectives were struggling to solve the brutal murders of University of Miami football player Marlon Barnes and his friend Tanganyika Lumpkins. Police considered Tanganyika's ex-boyfriend, LeBron Dennis, a potential suspect, but there was no evidence to link him to the crime. Investigators went to the area outside the nightclub where the victims were last seen. At a 24-hour gas station, a clerk had seen a suspicious man wearing a hooded sweatshirt, pacing back and forth, watching the club across the street. All of this took place at the same time Barnes and Tanganyika were inside the club partying. The clerk was concerned and called police. By the time they arrived, the man had gotten in a car and left. The clerk said she did not see his face. She gave a precise description of his car, recalling every detail, including the make and model, its tinted windows, and a missing rear license plate.
We have some pictures we'd like to show you.
Investigators showed the woman photos of LeBron Dennis's car. She didn't recognize it and was certain about what she had seen. Police needed to locate the car and its driver. They looked further into the background of Tim Wanika, trying to find a lead to someone who may have wanted to harm her. They interviewed a number of her friends.
It wasn't a mutual thing at all. She wanted.
Detective Thomas Romani discovered that Tim Wanika's relationship with LeBrant Dennis had been fraught with violence and stalking, a far cry from the mutual breakup that Dennis had described.
It was a very controlling relationship.
And as we spoke to more friends and acquaintances, we learned that Tim Wanika and LeBrant Dennis had an argument early in the week, and she had left him. There had been some violent breakups and domestic violence between them.
Dennis said he was asleep at his sister's home when the murders occurred. Now, detectives weren't convinced. They obtained Dennis's cell phone records. On the morning before the murders, he'd made a call to a man named Stuart Dillard. Investigators were anxious to speak with him.
Hello, we're detectives with the Miami-Dade Police Department. We'd appreciate your cooperation.
They met with Stuart. He was extremely nervous. He, of course, saw the murder on the news, and he was able to put it together that he lent this sawed-off shotgun to LeBrant Dennis, and he suspected that the sawed-off shotgun was possibly used in some criminal act.
Stuart Dillard said that on April 14th, one day after the murders, Dennis called him again and told him where to retrieve his shotgun and duffel bag. Inside, Stuart found a large folding knife that was not his, and several articles of clothing. When he looked at his shotgun, Stuart noticed that the wooden fore-end was missing.
He became very afraid of what had happened. He put some things together in his mind, and he thought that he would be culpable or somehow involved.
Stuart told investigators he disposed of the clothing in a dumpster and had thrown the knife and shotgun down a storm drain. All he kept was the duffel bag. Investigators took possession of it, hoping they could tie it directly to LeBrant Dennis.
When we first started speaking to Stuart, we were apprehensive about what he was telling us because he did admit that he lent the potential murder weapon to LeBrant Dennis. So we did investigate thoroughly what he had to tell us, and we believe what he was telling us was the truth, that he unknowingly lent this firearm to LeBrant Dennis.
Dad, it's a knife.
Miami-Dade police went to the storm drain and found the discarded weapons, exactly where Stuart said they would be.
Some water. Anything else you see down there?
They retrieved the knife and the shotgun.
That's what we're looking for.
I'm gonna go back down and see if there's anything else.
The weapons were bagged for analysis. Armed with this new evidence, the investigation of LeBrant Dennis intensified. Police interviewed his known acquaintances. Jamie Meyer was a former girlfriend.
Good, how you doing? Is this your car?
She admitted that she often loaned her car to Dennis.
Traffic violations. Do you mind if I take a few photos?
Police saw that her car resembled the suspicious vehicle seen on the night of the murders. An officer photographed the car. The vehicle had no rear license plate, like the vehicle described by the clerk at the gas station. Investigators re-interviewed the gas station clerk.
We showed the photographs of her car to the clerk, and she positively identified that as being the same car she saw on that evening.
Police had established another connection between LeBrant Dennis and the car.
No doubt about it.
But it was highly circumstantial. To link him to the murders, they turned to the forensic evidence. They were confident that the bag had been used to carry the murder weapons. The duffel bag turned over by Dennis's friend Stewart was examined by criminalist Toby Wolson. Wolson found what appeared to be droplets of dried blood inside the bag.
I was asked to do the DNA interpretation of samples taken from a duffel bag, and we did analysis of those and compared those samples to the standards from the victim and the subject.
Wolson found a match between the blood in the duffel bag and the blood of one of the victims.
The DNA profiles obtained from the samples from the bag match the DNA profiles obtained from Marlon Barnes' bloodstain standard, which means that those samples came from Marlon Barnes.
Piece by piece, Miami authorities were building their case against LeBrant Dennis. Criminalists had evidence connecting Dennis's gym bag to one of the victims, but it would take more than a bloodstain to charge LeBrant Dennis with murder. The murders of University of Miami student Marlon Barnes and his childhood friend Tim Wanika Lumpkins were close to being solved. A wealth of evidence, including a knife and a shotgun, had been discovered. But so far, nothing tied the gruesome double murder directly to ex-boyfriend LeBrant Dennis. Miami-Dade criminalist Thomas Quirk examined the flat tire from the car Barnes had driven the night before he was killed.
I noted that the tire had a very curious V-shaped mark. Once I received the knife and examined the knife, I realized that the tip of the knife was bent and it was very dull. If this was a knife that made the marks, my job would be now to stab the tire with that knife and see if I could reproduce those V-shaped marks.
Quirk analyzed the test cuts against the punctures from the night of the crime. He found the two sets of punctures to be wholly consistent, concluding that Dennis's knife was used to slash the victim's tires. Quirk also examined the shotgun found in the storm drain. He compared wood splinters collected at the crime scene to the now bare forend of the shotgun.
It's no different than building an airplane or building a model car. You take the pieces, you look at them, you notice the fracture patterns to them, the manufacturer's markings, and you simply place them together and make a little mold out of it. And we found that once we did that, it fit perfectly into the frame of the shotgun. Chances are that this shotgun was used to bludgeon the two victims to death.
In addition to the wood splinters, they also collected metal fragments at the crime scene. Criminalist George Borghi examined the fragments.
At the time that the pieces of metal were found, they were unknown in terms of what the origin was. When the shotgun was recovered and they put all the pieces together, it was obvious from my perspective that there was a broken trigger guard, and the two pieces of metal looked like they could be fragments of metal from the trigger guard themselves.
But to prove an exact match between the metal fragments and the trigger guard would require more than the appearance of a close fit.
The molecular structure and the atomic structure of the metal particles are what give it the unique fracture pattern. Not only are the edges compared to show that the edges line up perfectly, in this situation it's a three-dimensional fracture. So besides the edges comparing favorably, the interior fractures compared favorably, meaning that every contoured edge of one piece fit within the contours of the adjoining piece and of the shotgun. So therefore, a combination of all those characteristics exclude the possibility that those trigger guard pieces came from any other weapon besides that one.
With this evidence, investigators now had probable cause. They charged LeBrant Dennis with the murders of Timwanika Lumpkins and Marlon Barnes. But to prove his guilt, police needed direct physical evidence. They once again turned to medical examiner Dr. Sam Galino. Galino had previously noted peculiar L and T-shaped wounds sustained by the victims. Galino compared the evidence to diagrams of the victims' injuries.
And we were able to compare different aspects of the shotgun to the wounds, and indeed found out that different aspects of the shotgun matched to a great degree of certainty the wounds that were on both of the bodies. I was able to conclude that this shotgun had been used to beat both Marlon Barnes and Timwanika Lumpkins.
LeBrant Dennis continued to profess his innocence, despite the strong case against him. But Miami-Dade investigators had amassed a wealth of evidence supporting his guilt, and it had all started with a case of envy.
From the evidence that we were able to establish in this investigation, LeBrant Dennis became extremely upset when he had found out that Timwanika Lumpkins went to meet Marlon Barnes at this event that hosted many celebrity football players from the NFL and college.
Investigators were convinced that LeBrant Dennis followed the victims to Marlon Barnes' apartment. When Barnes opened the door, Dennis struck him across the face. When Dennis finished attacking Barnes, he went after Timwanika. LeBrant Dennis was tried and convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. LeBrant Dennis's violent relationship with Timwanika Lumpkins led police to closely investigate him and ultimately solve the crime. But in some cases, there is no obvious suspect. Fresno, California is a quiet, peaceful city, known for its proximity to 3 national parks. On Friday, February 18, 2000, Nancy and Ralph Gower were making plans for the upcoming weekend.
Yeah, let's do lunch, sure.
Nancy was going to drive to their vacation home that evening.
So you're going to be real busy.
Ralph, who worked as an auto salesman, had to be at the dealership the following morning, but planned to drive up Saturday afternoon. The Gowers had been married for 12 years.
I'll be nice, Will.
I can't wait.
Thanks. Be nice.
That night, Nancy drove alone to their vacation house. The next morning, Ralph failed to show up for work. His concerned employer went to his house to check on him. But when she peered through the window, she saw him lying on the floor. Panicked, she tried to get Ralph's attention, but he wasn't moving. She called 911. Fresno police detectives Darrell Green and Al Murrieta responded. An emergency response team had already forced entry into the residence and pronounced the victim dead at the scene. 2 bullet wounds marked the right side of his chest, but there were no shell casings present. The area immediately around the body seemed unusually clean, but detectives noted a small amount of blood under the sofa, perhaps overlooked by the killer.
Unless he was laying here originally. Notice some of the dust here. Looks like something's been either moved or there's some broken stuff underneath the table. Something's not right, or the couch has been moved.
It appeared the furniture had been moved.
What initially stood out to the investigators is that we could tell that the couch had been moved and that the scene was extremely clean, indicating that someone had cleaned up the crime scene and moved furniture after the victim had been shot.
Crime scene investigators took photographs and meticulously dusted surfaces for fingerprints. Broken items on the coffee table suggested a struggle had taken place. In the entryway, investigators found a gym bag. Inside the bag was a loaded revolver.
Provide us with a serial number on your property sheet so we can check it. So we can get downtown. I can see if it belongs. Okay. Tell one more thing to check. Okay.
Detectives searched the house for signs of a break-in. There were none. The automatic garage door mechanism had been shut off.
It's disengaged from the lock there.
The door could now be opened by hand.
At the bottom, total perimeter. Find anything over here? No, I just checked that first drawer. I don't know what's in that bag. I haven't checked it. Kind of heavy. Oh, goodness. You want to turn these over to Mickey?
The detectives found more weapons in the garage. The assortment of firearms, along with the revolver found in the house, would be sent to a lab for ballistics tests.
Select this for now.
Detective Murrieta needed to contact the victim's wife.
I'm formulating questions in my mind. First of all, establishing where was she at the time that we believe the murder actually took place, who could alibi for her, and one other striking thing that I needed to clear up, who else had keys to that residence?
While the Fresno police pursued the investigation, Ralph Gower's body was autopsied. The pathologist would make further curious findings. Cause of death was attributed to the 2 bullet wounds to the chest. But pathologist Vinu Gopal noted something more.
At the autopsy, I found evidence of blunt trauma and gunshot wounds to the chest and injuries to the wrist. These injuries were consistent with handcuff injuries.
It appeared that Ralph Gower had been shackled to something before he was shot.
So you have handcuff injuries and somebody's laying on his back. Next thing you always think of, is it some sort of an execution style killing?
Police reached Nancy Gower and informed her of her husband's death.
Detective Maria from earlier.
She was shaken by the news and cooperated with the investigation.
A few things to just clarify on time. Can you tell me where you were Friday night?
The last time she saw her husband was the previous evening, just before she left for the vacation home.
And he went back to work, and I headed up to the cabin.
She expected Ralph to join her after he finished work, but he never showed up.
Oh, I don't know. I guess I was around.
Detective
Friday
Green
lunch
got a sense of Nancy and Ralph's marriage.
What we found was they were the all-American couple, and from talking to people who worked with both Nancy and Ralph, they were well-liked, and they seemed to be madly in love with each other.
Chance. Well, Nancy, we're going to be needing to talk again, and we'll update you as we get the information. We're still in the early process of the investigation. Okay? Thank you. Thank you.
Everything that could potentially be a reason for the homicide was discredited, including any financial problems, any problems at work, anything that she thought could have been related, we were able to discredit.
The guns found at the crime scene were sent to the Fresno Crime Lab for testing. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan tested bullets fired from the gun and compared them against the slugs retrieved from the victim. There were no matches, but characteristics of the slugs led Sikhan to the first clue of the killer's identity. He or she had used a .40 caliber firearm. But as the days passed, investigators had yet to develop a motive or suspect.
Remember the hand marks we had on here? Yeah. We were going to take them down and have them fingerprint.
They felt they had only one place to turn.
Get a hold of all the guys that are involved in this and let's meet.
We felt our only option was to bring Nancy in and go deeper into their personal life, including giving her a polygraph to verify some of her earlier statements.
Nancy Gower had cooperated through the entire investigation of her husband's murder.
No motive for the murder. And we need to eliminate you as a suspect, and once we do that...
But to investigators, it seemed as if she had something to hide. In Fresno, California, police were investigating the murder of luxury auto salesman Ralph Gower. With no leads in the case, they asked Gower's wife, Nancy, to take a polygraph exam. She agreed, but just as the test was to begin, she wouldn't continue.
Okay, we've got a little bit of a problem. She doesn't want to take the test until she talks to both of you.
She asked to speak with the investigators.
Hi.
I understand you wanted to talk to us for a minute.
Yeah, I really think I should tell you something. Well, we
She made a stunning admission to Detective Green.
So we started having this.
The bombshell in this case was that Nancy indicated that she was having an affair with one of our police officers. Not only was he a police officer, but prior to coming onto the department, he had been a full-time minister and in fact was a chaplain with the Fresno Police Department, one of our own.
The officer's name was Paul Hirth. Nancy told the detectives that she and Hirth had been involved for several months, but she said she recently ended the affair. Hirth couldn't accept the breakup and continued calling her.
You know, he's also a Baptist minister, so I didn't want anybody
Investigators now faced the possibility of a killer in their ranks.
When Ralph was at work, sometimes we do that.
After Nancy's admission, she took the polygraph and passed.
You had a question about talking about...
An internal committee was formed to investigate.
We knew we had to hurry on this case. If a police officer was the suspect and we were allowing an officer to continue to work and he was a murder suspect, speed was of the utmost.
Police checked the staff sign-in sheet for the night of Ralph's murder.
Is there any indication they were supposed to work that night?
No, should have been his regular day off.
All right. Is that
According to the sheet, Officer Hirth and his partner were on duty during the time in question.
Later what's going on in this. Thanks.
When investigators spoke with Hirth's partner, he said that he had not worked that night and had not initialed the sign-out sheet.
With you. Do you work with Paul Hirth?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Were you
It appeared Officer Hirth was attempting a cover-up. Police called him in for questioning.
Hi, Paul. Sergeant Green with Homicide. This is Detective Marietta. I want to talk to you about the death of Ralph Gower. Occurred about a week ago.
Actually, I was expecting a call from you.
Really?
Hey, look, I didn't do
Hirth was forthcoming about the affair, but denied committing any crime.
I may have broke some police rules, but again, I didn't murder anybody.
Okay, well, that's kind of what we thought. We were wondering if maybe you couldn't fill us in a little bit. Were you working February 18th?
Yes.
Oh, you were?
Yes. Yeah, I was on patrol at a college campus.
He stated that he had been on patrol on the 18th.
And I broke up the fight.
They asked about his partner.
A partner that night?
It was Officer Andre Benson.
So he was working?
No, I signed him in, but he wasn't there.
Oh, he didn't show up? Or?
I signed him in, but he didn't show up.
Okay. Could we look in your locker?
When they asked Hirth if they could search his house and his work locker, he agreed.
Took a look at your gun?
That'd be okay.
Okay, good. Let's go down to, let's go out this way and take a look at, okay, could you step right back over? Okay.
They took his police-issued equipment along with his uniform. Inside the officer's home, investigators located his service weapon. It was a .40 caliber Beretta, the same caliber gun used in the killing of Ralph Gower. Criminalists Iqbal Sikhan and Gary Kortner received Hirth's weapon. The gun was fired into a sealed water tank. Fired slugs from Hirth's pistol would be compared to the slugs that killed Ralph Gower. Police waited anxiously for results to see if the gun used to uphold the law would be the same weapon used to break it. Fresno police were investigating fellow officer Paul Hirth. They believed he had murdered the husband of his former lover, Nancy Gower. Criminalist Iqbal Sikhan performed a side-by-side comparison of slugs fired from Officer Hirth's handgun and the bullets that killed Ralph Gower. Sikhan looked at several class characteristics, including the caliber, the direction of the twist, and the lands and grooves of the slugs. The results pointed directly at the suspect.
The bullets that killed the victim came out of Paul Hirth's duty pistol.
Paul Hirth was arrested for the murder of Ralph Gower. When he was confronted with the evidence, he quickly changed his story.
Paul, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can't.
Officer Hirth now claimed he went to the Gower house with the sole intention of apologizing for his indiscretions with Ralph's wife.
I know you having relations with your wife. With my wife? Yeah, how's the matter with you?
When Hirth told him about the affair, he became enraged and attacked the officer. He said during the struggle, Ralph got control of his baton. He said he went into police mode and drew his gun. After shooting Ralph twice, he panicked and proceeded to clean up the room. Finally, he let himself out through the garage and returned to work. Hirth's claim of shooting Ralph Gower in self-defense rang hollow with investigators.
Slightly higher as it exits?
Yes.
To test the officer's story, they re-examined the crime scene reports.
Spots about the size of a $50, 50-cent piece?
About a dime, yeah.
10 cents? Okay.
Yeah.
They believed the angle of the bullet wounds to Gower's chest proved he'd been shot from above at a distance of 2 feet while lying defenseless on the floor. Investigators returned to the Gower house.
6 feet 3. Get over here. It was on the ground at that time.
Right. Okay. Yes. And let's see if there is any other
chance of-
evidence of any damage.
They
to the
scoured the
walls.
crime scene for any indication of bullet damage to the walls. If the victim had been standing, as Hirth claimed, the bullets would have passed through his body and there would be damage to the walls. But there was none.
Possible scenario is that the victim was.
All the crime scene evidence supported the case that Officer Hirth was standing over the victim when he fired.
Or you could be here.
Despite convincing evidence, prosecutors know juries are often reluctant to convict officers of the law. Fresno authorities turned to the FBI. Police enlisted the help of forensic profiler and criminalist Mark Safaric. As a special agent with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, Safaric studies crime scene photos and other evidence from individual cases. From the case materials, he developed a profile of the dynamics that took place between the victim and the assailant. His conclusions in the Gower case contradicted Paul Hirth's claims of self-defense.
I think both behaviorally and forensically, it's clear that Gower was not in a position to present a threat to Hirth. There's no indication his hands were in front of his face or attempting to ward off the potential of being shot. And the fact that the gunshot wounds are so close together, almost directly over the heart area, tells me that he was likely unconscious at the time he was shot.
Based on the evidence, police believe that Paul Hirth went to Ralph Gower's house with no other intention but to kill him. Nancy Gower had ended the affair, and he needed to dispose of his rival. Investigators believe Hirth struck Gower with his baton, then proceeded to handcuff him to a table leg before shooting him twice in the chest. Investigators concluded that Paul Hirth acted alone, and Nancy had no knowledge of his intentions. Paul Hirth was convicted of aggravated manslaughter for the death of Ralph Gower. He was sentenced to 20 years. Killers commit their crimes for many reasons, but when they are driven by dark emotion, they unwittingly leave behind a history of clues. Forensic science exploits these clues to uncover hard evidence and solve crimes of passion. In Colorado, the mysterious abduction of a young mother ends up a brutal homicide. There are few clues and fewer suspects. Now, investigators must try to build their case out of redwood. In rural Minnesota, 4 minutes of grainy surveillance video is the only link to a missing girl's whereabouts. Authorities struggle to put this crucial clue into focus and turn a short length of tape into a life sentence. Anytime, anywhere, people disappear, kidnapped from their daily routines. Predators always leave clues behind. But chasing them takes time, hampering investigators' attempts to solve these fatal abductions. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Natalie and Matthew Mirabal, their family and friends, spent a fun-filled evening on September 25th, 1999. At approximately 8 p.m., they returned to their home in Longmont, a suburb of Boulder, Colorado. They thought the evening was over, but their troubles were just beginning. Later that night, Longmont police received a call from Matthew Mirabal, reporting his wife missing. He said Natalie went to the grocery store for groceries 3 hours earlier and hadn't returned.
That's the last time I saw her. That's the last time I talked to her.
Because Matthew couldn't leave the baby and Natalie took the car, he asked his friends to go to the store to look for her. But they found only her vehicle. No sign of Natalie. She never went into the store. Though 3 hours is not a long time to go missing, authorities were concerned, and a police officer was dispatched to the scene. The officer met the Mirabal's friends in the parking lot. A cursory look inside and in the trunk revealed nothing suspicious.
Thought it'd be best to call you right away.
Thing looks okay here. No?
The only thing out of place was a fresh-looking scratch on the side of the car.
Were these here before? Did you notice?
They found no clue to Natalie's whereabouts.
564J.
Police impounded the vehicle for closer inspection. Investigator Steve Slauson of the Longmont Police Department and Detective Steve Ainsworth of the Boulder County Sheriff's Office spoke with Matthew Mirabal, who went to the police station to file a missing persons report.
We're doing everything we can to follow through.
He told police that he and Natalie, along with their infant daughter and Natalie's brother, returned to the apartment around 11:30.
No.
Natalie remembered she needed to buy diapers and left for the supermarket. Her brother had already gone to bed, and Matthew fell asleep waiting for her.
It was about 11.
When he woke up 3 hours later, she still hadn't returned. The more police learned, the more concerned they grew about her fate.
She was, belonged to her church group. She had a baby. Her younger brother lived in the house with them. There was nothing to indicate that she would just run off and leave. We had to treat it as a possible abduction. I had patrol officers canvassing the neighborhood, looking or listening for anything unusual. The St. Vrain River runs through town. And so I had patrol dogs working up and down the banks, trying to get all the bases down for a genuine missing persons case.
She wasn't the first young woman to disappear from a supermarket parking lot. In recent months, several women in the area had been accosted or abducted and raped on their way to their cars. The crimes remained unsolved. Former prosecutor Trip DeMuth looked for a connection.
We also had reports of suspicious males in the grocery store parking lot. And we had reports at other grocery store parking lots of similar suspicious males. So you have to look at every possible suspect in any given case and chase any lead down. It's gonna lead you ultimately to the guilty party.
The morning after her disappearance, Natalie's friends were busy putting up posters all over Longmont. They hoped somebody had seen her. It turned out that someone had. 12 miles away, a couple hiking made a shocking discovery. At first, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The female victim was not only dead, she'd been decapitated.
.536 from arrival, 0.8 of a mile up above Buckingham is Matthew.
Detective Steve Ainsworth went to the scene. He joined other area investigators who had already cordoned off a wide area surrounding the victim.
Your uniform officer, I think it's Eric.
The authorities divided their duties to gather as much information from the crime scene as possible. The first assignment, to identify the victim.
It looks like the woman that was missing from Longmont. This clothing is the same, the physical description is the same, the appearance is the same. She has a mark on her ankle, which is described as a Z-shaped mark by her husband, and it appears that she does have that mark.
Her head was found several feet away. The pattern of blood under the body suggested Natalie was cut after her death. Investigators believed she was killed elsewhere and her body dumped here.
It looks like she was probably decapitated right there where she was found, or close by to where she was found. There's a good deal of rage and a good deal of violence associated with this.
Anything lying in the surrounding area was photographed and collected. But despite the best efforts of the police, it didn't amount to much.
There's not a lot of evidence down there. There's the body, and there's not a lot of blood around the area. There's also no immediate evidence of any sort of struggle down here.
But this early in the investigation, nothing could be overlooked. Even a broken segment of redwood board could be a clue, according to Boulder County Detective Tony Matthews.
It was very clean and fresh and not weathered. It appeared to have been recently broken. There was no dirt on it. There was no dust, anything like that. So, again, at the time, didn't have any idea if it really meant anything, but it was just out of place there, and it was close to the body, so it was collected.
Only after all the potential clues were documented and collected was the victim removed from the scene for her autopsy. At a car turnaround area, forensic technicians poured plaster casts of several tire tread marks pressed into the dirt, and hoped that some of them might pay off later. As the crime scene was being processed, a woman found a purse on a nearby road. Inside was Natalie Mirabal's identification, her wallet, and some cash. Detectives now knew the reason for her murder was not robbery.
You and John could do a camp.
Investigators formed a task force to chase all leads. They feared that Natalie Mirabal might be the most recent victim of a serial killer.
There were transients that were being beheaded in the lower downtown Denver area, which is only about 30 minutes away. Decapitations as a general rule are not that common. And so the fact that we had a decapitation here and we had decapitations occurring down in Denver was something that I talked to Steve Ainsworth about investigating.
Detective Ainsworth went to Denver looking for parallels between the cases and compared the killer's MO to the other grisly slayings.
I interviewed the lieutenant of the persons unit at Denver Police Department. We went over my case, went over his cases, and there were no similarities whatsoever.
No similarities meant no leads. The only facts they were sure of came from the victim herself. Unlike the other victims, the autopsy determined she had been struck on the head and strangled prior to her decapitation. And the victims of similar recent abductions were sexually assaulted. Natalie was not. In Colorado, thumbprints were collected from all licensed drivers. This enabled investigators to identify absolutely that the victim was Natalie Mirabal.
Matthew.
Once the body was positively ID'd, Natalie's family was informed of her murder.
When I first met Natalie's mother that night, Anselma Vasquez, we notified her that her daughter had been found and she was dead. I didn't tell her what had happened or anything like that, but obviously she was extremely upset.
Well, who did this to her? What?
Investigators next set out to determine whether she was a random victim or murdered by someone she knew. The interviews with her family members revealed Natalie had a happy life and no enemies. Her mother, Anselma Vasquez, remembers her daughter.
She was the sunshine for everyone. You could be in a dark room, gloomy, and Natalie would just make that day so happy and so sunny. And she brought joy into everybody's life.
For Detective Ainsworth, it was at that moment the case became personal.
I told her before I left that night, I told her, in Selma, I promise you, I will find out who did this to Natalie.
For Natalie's mother, and in the name of justice, investigators vowed not to rest until they found the killer. When Natalie Mirabal's decapitated body was found in the mountains, investigators faced two possible scenarios. She was the random victim of a stranger, or her killer was someone she knew. Because most victims know their killers, Natalie's husband, Matthew Mirabal, agreed to allow investigators to search their apartment for anything connecting her to her murderer. According to former prosecutor Trip DeMuth, spouses and family members are always the first suspects investigators try to eliminate.
One of the rules that you follow in criminal investigations is that you start with very small circles and you work out from there. So a husband is always an initial suspect.
Something fell on
During his interview, they noticed a fresh bandage on his thumb.
Something fell on it? Yeah.
Matthew explained he'd cut himself on his job as a house painter. He cooperated with police, letting them photograph the small wound. At this point, investigators checked out anything even slightly out of the ordinary. Detective Ainsworth and his team would have the chance to sort through it all later to determine what might be relevant.
Ron, I might need you to use your flashlight.
Their investigation progressed to Natalie's car, impounded from the supermarket parking lot.
All right, we got some plant material.
The front floor was littered with leaves and twigs.
I'm gonna get a sample of these items on the floor.
Forensic technicians collected all the plant material. Wedged between the seat and the console, almost hidden from view, was a pair of brown cloth work gloves. Detective Tony Matthews questioned the kind of work they'd been used for.
You could see blood on them and started looking at them more closely, and there was a cut, a very small cut in the area of the left thumb.
All of the potential evidence was sent to the lab. The leaf debris from the car was sent to the University of Colorado, where they were analyzed by botanist Jane Bach. Almost anywhere a car travels, it picks up bits of leaves, twigs, and seeds. In this case, the plant fragments left behind were considered possible evidence, as well as clues to the murder's location.
If you look on the floor mats, under the floor mats, and those wells that are where the windshield wipers are, and under the fenders, and in the grooves on tires, all of those places have plant fragments.
In Colorado, different plants grow in different regions. The plants in the high mountains are not the same as the ones that grow at lower altitude.
After we examined these plant fragments, it was obvious that the car had been up one of the canyons around Boulder. I couldn't say exactly what canyon, and it was not characteristic of vegetation found even in landscaping around homes on the plains.
Bach's findings placed Natalie's car at one of the nearby canyons. Agent Scott Pratt of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation attempted to narrow it down to the vicinity of the crime scene by examining the car's tires that were sent to the lab. He compared the tread impressions from the canyon against the tires from Natalie's car. He traced the pattern of the casts onto an acetate overlay. Then he put the overlay against the tires he wished to compare. In this way, he determined whether the model, size, and pattern of the tire matched. These details, called class characteristics, are a good start. But thousands of tires with identical class characteristics roll out of factories every day. It is only when a tire hits the road that the individual characteristics that make each tire unique are detectable.
As we're driving down rocky roads, we may have the rocks take chips out of the tires, or something may put a slice in the tire. They may hit curbs that do damage to the tire. So there's different things that we look at where we can literally nail it down to that's the only tire that could have made that impression.
Investigators usually count themselves lucky to collect 1 or 2 impressions of individual characteristics. In this case, Pratt considered himself more fortunate than most.
What was interesting is that I had 4 different tire impressions that I was looking at. As I did my examination, I came to the conclusion that this particular vehicle could have made 3 of them.
Through his efforts, Pratt could confidently say Natalie's car had been to the canyon where her body was found, and then inexplicably returned to the store parking lot.
If I would have matched only 1 tire, that would have been a lot broader conclusion. But where you have 3 different tire designs on a vehicle and all 3 are present at the scene, that makes it a lot more substantial of a conclusion.
Detective Matthews and his colleagues now needed to find out why Natalie's car had been returned to the parking lot.
Give me a light. The idea that the killer would take her, go somewhere, come back and leave the car where he took it from really didn't make much sense. And so that was one of the big things that we just thought just doesn't make sense, and let's see how we can show what really happened.
That would be a challenge. Not only did the crime lack logic, it had no motive, and not one suspect.
The biggest challenges we had was, we were trying to prove a negative in a lot of ways. They're trying to say that an unknown stranger came and did this, and basically that's saying the whole world is a suspect.
In a case like this, the job is not to find suspects, but to eliminate them. Detective Ainsworth continued scrutinizing the victim's husband, Matthew Mirabal. Matthew gave authorities permission to search the Mirabal house. Nothing seemed particularly noteworthy or suspicious, until they found a recently executed life insurance policy. It provided $250,000 to Matthew Mirabal in the event of his wife's death. The policy wasn't so unusual, except detectives found it in a briefcase stashed beneath the living room sofa. Police believed they found the first clue to Natalie's murder, a potential motive. Natalie Mirabal was dead, and Colorado investigators tried to eliminate her husband, Matthew, from the suspects list, until they hit a snag. A $250,000 life insurance policy on Natalie, issued only a few months earlier, seemed generous and a little too timely. Detective Steve Ainsworth found out something else about the policy. Matthew had purchased it in secret.
He had paid with a money order from a nearby grocery store when he would write $2.79 checks or $1.50 checks. He wrote checks for everything, but he went to this grocery store and took the trouble of getting a money order for this particular life insurance policy rather than writing a check that his wife would have seen.
Green chair over there.
The insurance provided a potential motive, and it steered the investigation toward Matthew Mirabal.
I just wanted to ask you some questions here. First of all, he tried to get $1 million on her. He told the agent that if anything ever happened to my wife, I want to be able to stay home and take care of my baby, which is kind of unusual. Also, the amount that he was asking for, in that she didn't have an income because she was a stay-at-home mom. He didn't have an income anywhere near that kind of money. And so when it was dropped down to $250,000 and he just immediately accepted it without argument or anything, that was a little suspicious also.
There's no problem. Thank you.
Detective Ainsworth went to the painting company where he worked to ask him some questions. But Mirabal and the other workers were out on jobs. Ainsworth took the opportunity to look around. He was careful to limit his search to outdoor public areas. He never went inside. Not knowing what exactly he was searching for, he checked the trash cans. He noticed a plastic shopping bag.
I pulled it out and I looked in it, and there was this flashlight packaging with the flashlight gone, the batteries gone. There's also a cardboard tab for a pair of cotton jersey gloves. And why I took it, I can't tell you. It's just, I don't know if it didn't go with the rest of the trash or why, but so I took it.
The items were sent to the crime lab, where technicians raised a fingerprint from the plastic bag. The police didn't have Matthew Mirabal's fingerprints on file to compare it against. They needed to collect more evidence. They impounded his truck, where Detective Tony Matthews found a more significant clue, one that might link Mirabal to the crime scene.
In the back of his truck was a piece of redwood, and this piece of redwood is very similar in appearance to the piece from the scene. I thought at the time, I wonder if this matches that broken off piece.
Piece of redwood?
The wood and other items were tagged and collected.
There's another piece of redwood.
Though the redwood was similar to the piece found at the crime scene, the two sections did not fit together, suggesting that a third piece was still out there, waiting to be found. Other clues also needed to be pursued. After seeing the flashlight packaging, one of the detectives remembered a similar flashlight he saw during the search of Mirabal's home.
Take a look at them, see what we got here.
They returned to the Mirabal house to collect it.
Thank you very much. I'm done. Can you tell us away from the food?
Swabs of the flashlight tested positive for human blood, and its DNA was analyzed. Other investigators continued to comb the crime scene in ever-widening circles. They looked for the knife used to decapitate the victim, or any other obvious clue. It paid off. What they found was another shattered section of redwood.
It was about an 8-inch piece, and I looked at it and it had the knot on one end, which I could tell this is going to match the other one.
The three segments, two from the crime scene, one from Mirabal's truck, went to the crime lab for comparison. The case was literally beginning to come together.
Sure enough, you could just put them together like three pieces of a puzzle.
Though investigators couldn't build a solid case from broken lumber, the match further implicated Matthew Mirabal in the murder of his wife, Natalie.
That looks good.
Joe Clayton of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation examined the gloves found in Natalie's car. His expertise is serology, the study of blood and bodily fluids. Swabs revealed the stains were human blood. But that wasn't all.
One of those had an obvious cut along one of the seams in the thumb area. By turning the glove inside out, I noticed there was blood on the inside. The blood on the outside did not look like it had soaked through. It was not that thick of a stain. So I not only collected blood from the outside, I collected blood from the seam on the inside.
The samples from both sides of the glove were analyzed for DNA. The DNA on the outside was consistent with Natalie Mirabal's. The DNA on the inside was not. Investigators concluded it belonged to her killer. Detectives knew Mirabal had a similar cut on his finger, and now they believed the slashed, bloody glove had put the solution to the crime within their reach. Matthew Mirabal was brought in for DNA testing and fingerprinting.
Mr.
Maribel. I really appreciate you coming down here.
The conclusive results came back from the lab. The blood on the inside of the glove was Matthew Mirabal's. His DNA was also found on the flashlight, along with DNA consistent with Natalie's. The prints lifted from the plastic bag found at his workplace also belonged to him. Detective Ainsworth concluded he'd purchased the flashlight and the gloves for the sole purpose of murdering his wife.
And that indicates that this isn't a heat of passion thing where he just got angry and it was a substantial heat of passion where he just killed her on a spur of the moment kind of a thing. This indicated that he had planned it for a day or two.
Investigators theorized that shortly after arriving home from the street fair, Matthew and Natalie Mirabal and their infant daughter left on an errand. Matthew managed to get Natalie to an unknown location where he killed her with the redwood board, hoping to collect the insurance money. After taking her body to the canyon and decapitating her, he drove to the supermarket, left her car there, and walked home with the baby. By decapitating her, Mirabal believed he'd throw suspicion off of himself, hoping police would think Natalie's murder was linked to the other beheadings in the area. He was wrong.
During the course of the investigation and the prosecution, you get to know the victim's family very well. We got to know all of Natalie's extended family and got very close to them. And so by the end of the investigation, it's not just the injustice that you're trying to correct, but it's an entire family that you're trying to support and work for. And you don't want to let them down.
Everybody that was involved in that case did such a great job. It was amazing. Now I realize sometimes people put the system down, but they don't realize how hard it is and how much work it is, you know. And people say the system doesn't work. The system works.
For his crime, Matthew Mirabal was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Natalie Mirabal's grim fate was known within hours of her disappearance. In other abductions, the victim's fate remains an agonizing mystery. The outlying areas of Duluth, Minnesota are a haven for fishermen and hunters. In 1999, one hunter preyed on young women. In the early hours of May 27th, the Carlton County Police dispatcher received a call. A clerk was missing from a secluded convenience store. No one, including her family, had heard from her since the previous evening. Police arrived and spoke to the owner, who discovered the store unattended. He told police the clerk, Katie Poyer, was very responsible and would never leave the store, even for a minute. Cash was still in the register. Whatever happened here didn't involve robbery. Moose Lake and Carlton County officers checked the area outside the store, but found nothing suspicious or out of place, and absolutely no sign of Katie. The store was equipped with surveillance cameras. Whatever happened was likely captured on tape. The police notified the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The Bureau helps rural police departments solve serious crimes. The agents were eager to view the tapes.
Now, has their parents been talked to?
They discovered the images were fuzzy, but the implications were clear. 19-year-old Katie Poyer had been abducted. In Carlton County, Minnesota, store security footage gave authorities a clue to the fate of Katie Poyer. As the grainy scene played out over 4 horrifying minutes, it provided BCA Special Agent Phil Wagner with an extraordinary but inadequate perspective on the crime.
It gave us a rare piece of evidence. We were actually able to see the crime in progress. It told us where this crime happened. It told us when it happened. It showed clearly the victim. The only thing it didn't tell us was who did it.
Whoever he was, investigators needed to find him right away. A young woman's life likely depended on it. But Sheriff David Sebo had only the barest description to go on.
The surveillance tape that we looked at told us that we were dealing with a white male, an approximate age range, an approximate height range, and also a method of how he went about abducting Katie Poyer.
The kidnapper's face remained indistinct. The situation frustrated investigators. Here was photographic evidence of a crime in progress, foiled by the limitations of the video cameras. And the motive for the crime was equally unclear. Authorities knew they had to launch a wide-scale search, and they had to do it now.
We know that the clock is running on any victim that's taken, as far as their safety goes.
The Minnesota National Guard joined the Carlton County Police Department, the Moose Lake Sheriff's Office, and throngs of volunteers in the search for Katie Poyer.
Everybody loves Katie.
Police spoke to the victim's mother to see if perhaps Katie mentioned being stalked or followed, or if she was having trouble with anyone. Her mother couldn't think of any problems her daughter might have had. In fact, it was a happy time. Katie had just moved in with her fiancé and was excited about her new apartment. She had many friends and was working her way through college. She was also considering becoming a police officer.
Thank you. You're welcome. Because now you've got a cook in your own house.
Mrs. Poyer urged the police to find her daughter.
Okay, ma'am. Good day.
They assured her they would do everything in their power to bring Katie home. In the days that followed, hundreds of law enforcement personnel and volunteers were brought in to aid in the search. But as the search went on, investigators' hopes of finding Katie alive were dwindling. Then, a canvass of the shops near the convenience store uncovered a potential witness. A clerk at a sandwich shop recalled seeing a man shortly before the abduction who acted strangely. She said he was staring at her and appeared to be lurking in the parking lot. The clerk kept her eye on him and was concerned enough to jot a partial license number from his black truck. BCA Special Agent Terry Smith.
As we canvassed the area, one of the common themes that we heard over and over was about a person with a black truck. We had a description that seemed to fit from a number of different people, and sometimes they were a little bit vague in what it was about him, but they all were troubled by the way he looked at women or the way that he seemed to behave.
From witness descriptions, investigators managed to put together a rough sketch. The information gathered from the witnesses suggested that Katie was in the hands of a sexual predator.
Well, what happened in the other 6 cases to the other?
Authorities held a press conference to enlist the public's help. If Katie was still in the area, perhaps someone had seen her or would recognize the sketch of her kidnapper.
I do not want to discuss some.
While the drawing circulated, Carlton County Sheriff David Sebo followed up on the black truck seen the night of the abduction.
We had received information of the partial license plate, and we entered that into the computer along with a description of the vehicle, and from that generated about 2,000 registered owners of vehicles in Minnesota.
The 2,000 names was a daunting list of potential suspects. No lead was left unchecked. The sheriff's office alerted officers to be on the lookout for any vehicles matching the truck's description and tags. Police made contact with everyone who had a similar license plate number. Donald Pintz was on that list. Pintz wasn't home. His wife acknowledged they owned a truck, but it was gray, not black. When asked about her husband's whereabouts on the evening of May 26th, she said he'd been fishing at their lake property, but had returned home around 8 p.m. He remained there for the rest of the night. Like many of their leads, this one went nowhere. Authorities returned to the tape, seeking some overlooked clue. They took it to video analyst Lance Parthay to see if he could clear up the image. Parthay wasn't optimistic.
When somebody contacts us and says, you know, I'd like you to look at our surveillance tape, instantly you know there's problems because the quality of the cameras, number one, are usually they're inexpensive because the surveillance systems that are put into these convenience stores are not necessarily put in to catch criminals. They're basically to monitor their facility to keep the employees honest. So you know the quality of the video is usually going to be poor.
With little to work with, Parthay did his best to enhance the video. Finessing the images from that camera, they determined the suspect wore a New York baseball jersey.
And there was some conversation about the number. Was it number 22? Was it number 23? And without being able to say 100% it was number 23, after looking at the tape and enhancing the contrast, we determined that the number 23 was more likely than the number 22.
This new bit of information needed to be public.
I'm Paul Molitor.
Authorities appealed to Minnesota Twins player Paul Molitor to make a public service announcement.
A young woman from Moose Lake, Minnesota. She's been missing since May 26, 1999.
They hoped his on-air plea might reach sports fans who recognized the suspicious character with this type of jersey.
This model of jersey is well.
Carleton County Police were inundated with calls. The public service announcement brought in over 1,800 new leads. Some of the callers even reported to have seen Katie. But none of the leads led to Katie. And hope she was still alive faded. As authorities narrowed down the leads, one man, a convicted sex offender named Samuel Becker, resembled the sketch. Becker denied any involvement or knowledge of Katie Poyer's abduction. Investigators noticed the large tattoo on his forearm and needed to find out whether the suspect on the videotape had similar markings. He agreed to cooperate with authorities and allow himself to be taped by the store's security cameras. When still photographs from both tapes were evaluated, authorities noticed tattoos on Becker's arm were clearly visible. Katie's kidnapper had no visible tattoos. Samuel Becker was not their man. BCA Special Agent Terry Smith and his team hit many dead ends as they eliminated suspects.
There were several people who became strong suspects for a period of time in the case. Sometimes they started out looking very, very good for the crime, and then we would either be able to establish that they couldn't have done it, or it didn't look like they had done it, and somebody else would become the preeminent suspect.
A man phoned authorities to say his co-worker, Donald Turner, wore a blue and white number 23 baseball jersey. He used to wear his hair long, but recently cut it short. Turner also drove a black truck. A check on Donald Turner revealed police already knew him, but by a more familiar name, Donald Pintz. They had interviewed his wife early in the investigation. They needed to find Pintz, and they needed to find him fast.
Is that Donald?
Investigators quickly tracked him down, never letting him out of their sight. They rushed to secure search warrants for his home and lake property.
Let me make a note.
The investigation now focused entirely on Donald Pintz. Donald Pintz was now under round-the-clock surveillance. Police believed he was the one responsible for the abduction of 19-year-old Katie Poyer from a convenience store in Moose Lake, Minnesota. Armed with the search warrants, detectives returned to Pintz's house. No one was home. But in the garage, they found a black truck. Its license plate matched the partial description given by the sandwich shop clerk. Police had the vehicle towed to the BCA crime lab. A forensic examination with a Lumalight looked for traces of blood. None was found inside or outside the truck. But it was evident that it had been recently and thoroughly cleaned. A clean black truck isn't necessarily suspicious, but police wondered why his wife said it was gray. Next, investigators searched Pintz's lakeside property, eventually focusing on the fire pit, where they screened the cold ashes. And that's when they found a tooth, along with fragments of bone. They carefully collected the frail remains. At Hamline University in Minnesota, anthropologist Susan Thurston Meister delicately sorted the fragments. Her first assignment, to determine if they were animal or human.
There are two ways of determining the difference between human bones and animal bones. The first is using your naked eye and just looking at the shape and the contours and the texture of the bone and where the muscle attachment areas are. The second way is to look at the microscopic structures. In humans, the microscopic structures very chaotically organized. They impinge on one another, they bump up against one another, and in animals, non-human animals, they are arranged in parallel rows.
The bones had come from a human. And from the pattern of chips and cracks on the surface, she determined the victim was incinerated shortly after death. After piecing together the larger bones, she had more information to share about the victim.
I was able to determine that the individual was female, of slight stature and build, and also that she was between the ages of 19 and 24 years of age.
The bones revealed key clues. The victim resembled Katie Poyer. But a fundamental question lingered. Were these actually Katie's remains? The focus shifted to the tooth retrieved from the fire pit. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension sent it to forensic odontologist Thomas Rumreich for analysis.
The tooth was tested for DNA. However, the tooth was so badly burned that any DNA evidence had been destroyed by the intense heat of the fire.
Dr. Rumreich needed to find another way to match this tooth with the victim. From its shape, and by reconstructing some of the jaw fragments, he determined the position of the molar in the victim's mouth. By coincidence, Katie Poyer had had the filling of that tooth replaced 2 weeks before her abduction. The burned tooth's filling had melted out during the fire. Because filling materials vary, Dr. Rumreich had the remains analyzed.
Because we had discovered that there was some evidence of metal fragments in the burned remains, we had those analyzed by the metallurgical folks at the BCA to determine if any of the components of that metal fragment corresponded with what we commonly use in filling material today.
Most silver fillings are made of a combination of metals called amalgam. Katie's dentist had also used a new dental adhesive to help the amalgam stay in the tooth. Analyzing the tooth from the fire pit, BCA forensic scientist Donald Melander made a compelling discovery. Traces of that same adhesive.
Since this is a new product, one would not expect to see it. The product had only been on the market for 6 months. And in fact, the dentist was using a sample that had been supplied to her at a dental show. So it's quite unique.
Investigators had gathered ample evidence against Donald Pintz. The dental adhesive gave them enough to pick him up. Authorities moved in for the arrest.
Driver, hands out the window. Step out the car. Do it now. Stay there. Don't move.
Confronted with the evidence, Pintz confessed.
Put her on the...
But later, he recanted his story and denied any knowledge of Katie Poyer. It was to no avail. The forensic evidence against him was overwhelming.
You recall taking the girl.
Authorities believe Pintz waited until Katie was alone in the store. Somehow, he lured her away from the register, got her to the back of the shop, and overpowered her. Then he led her out of the store and ultimately to her death. He disposed of her body in the fire pit at his lakeside property. But he failed to dispose of it completely. Donald Pintz was sentenced to life without parole. More than any other kind of case, solving an abduction is truly a race against time. And even though the clock sometimes runs out, the race to justice continues to the end. In the Florida Panhandle, a young passerby discovers a killer's dumping ground. A metal chain may be a link to a victim's final hours. But investigators must first confirm the identity from the charred bones if they ever hope to solve the brutal crime.
Jackie!
An idyllic backyard in rural Tennessee becomes the backdrop for the unthinkable.
Jackie!
A little girl disappears in broad daylight. With every passing hour, police lose hope of ever seeing her alive.
This one?
But before detectives can prove murder, they must find her body. Some killers choose to hide their victims. And investigators must then rely on forensic examiners to uncover proof of murder. These are just two extraordinary crimes that have made their way into the medical examiner's casebook. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The Gulf Coast of the Florida Panhandle is known for its quiet beaches and peaceful living. But on March 4th, 1999, Okaloosa County's tranquil lifestyle was threatened. That afternoon, investigator Stan Griggs of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office was called to an isolated wooded area. Children discovered a body while playing in the woods. Panicked, a young mother phoned police. In his 15 years with the department, Griggs had never seen anything like it.
There was a charred body that was secured to a tree with chains and rope. We actually could not tell definitively if it was male or female.
The investigators scoured the scene for clues, looking for anything that would tell them who this person was and why he or she died so violently. Although the crime scene was littered with debris, physical clues were scarce.
There wasn't a lot of evidence around the body. A few cans, a roll of duct tape, a couple items of clothing. We didn't find anything that would lead toward the identification of the victim, much less any perpetrators.
The victim's hands were bound with a blood-stained cord, and duct tape was stretched across what remained of the skull. Fragmented bones and tattered clothing were charred beyond recognition. It appeared the victim had been dead for quite some time.
There was insect activity, an insect activity that indicated that whoever perpetrated this made more than one visit.
The body showed evidence of maggots, a process that normally takes 2 weeks. But the finding posed more questions than it answered. The insects were burned just like the body. Forensic specialist Jan Johnson took samples.
It was a puzzle. We couldn't figure out why someone would come back, obviously, a couple of weeks after the person had died, to burn the body.
Dr. Michael Berkland, Chief Deputy Medical Examiner for the district, carefully prepared to recover the remains.
We were very intent on getting the body removed exactly the way it was pretty much positioned at the scene because of an injury that I identified to the neck region. That was going to be very important to keep the neck in that position until we got back and were able to x-ray.
The remains were taken to the morgue for autopsy. Evidence collected at the scene was transferred to the Forensic Science Unit at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. None of the items found at the crime scene produced anything concrete. Authorities were no closer to identifying the victim or the killer. After examination, it was determined the victim was an adult male, less than 6 feet tall. Establishing cause of death would fall to Dr. Michael Berkland.
When we got the body back, we went ahead and did x-rays looking for any projectiles or foreign bodies, and we did not see any evidence that this represented either a gunshot wound case, or there were no foreign knife tips or anything like that left in the body. The x-rays showed a number of fractures to the body of the upper extremities, what we call defense injuries, where the arms had been put up to try to ward off blows. There were a number of skull fractures that caused extensive fracturing of the base of the skull.
Dr. Berkland believed the victim was killed by a blunt force trauma to the neck. The autopsy report documented a brutal murder, and it also helped establish a sequence of events.
If you're transporting a dead body to what we would consider a secondary dump site, there's no need to bind it, gag it, and chain it to a tree. So it was common sense that told us that the body was probably transported there initially live, may have already indeed been injured because this was a fairly stocky person, and so without subduing him somehow, I would have thought you would have put up a considerable fight. And certainly you would not have to chain a dead person to the tree.
But Dr. Berkland was still puzzled by the insects. There were several populations of maggots present in the body. He concluded from their numbers and their size that the victim had been dead about a month.
The most startling revelation was that there was charred maggots, indicating that the maggots had been there for a while, grown up a little bit, and then somebody came back and set the fire. For the investigation, that meant that whoever had brought the body there had came back to the scene again.
Fingerprinting the victim was difficult. His hands had been damaged by fire. But there was enough soft tissue on the right thumb to make an impression.
Given that one of his fingers was not badly involved in the charring process, we were able to find enough minutia and ridge detail. So we were able to have sufficient information from that one finger to attempt a match.
While the prints were sent for comparison to the Florida Crime Lab, investigator Griggs was determined to learn the identity of the victim. The autopsy established the victim died sometime around the 1st of February. Investigator Griggs began checking missing persons reports.
We send out a bulletin over to law enforcement net that we have found the body and asking for any kind of missing persons information other agencies may have.
One stood out as a strong possibility. A local restaurant worker was reported missing on February 13, 1999.
Okay, get right on. Thanks, sir.
Cordell Richards was a 32-year-old male of Asian descent. The last time anyone saw him was around the 3rd.
We checked with the Fort Walton Beach Police Department, and they told us a friend had reported Cordell Richards missing. They naturally went to the apartment to check on his welfare. There they found young people who claimed that they didn't know where he was.
I'm alright, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. I'm looking for Cordell. Does he live there?
A young student named Crystal Maestas rented a room from Cordell. 17-year-old Ron Bell was her boyfriend. The two teenagers confirmed Cordell left in early February, but they didn't know why.
Okay. Is there anybody else in the house?
Just us two now.
You mind if I take a look?
Good.
Sir, could you have a seat over there?
Ron Bell and Crystal Maestas stuck with a story that Cordell Richards just disappeared after receiving some unknown type of court papers. He piled up some black bags in the apartment, and the next day he was gone along with the black bags. They never saw him again.
What's your first name?
Crystal.
Crystal, could you do me a favor?
The teenager's story seemed suspicious.
Give me a call and let me know.
Sure.
Okay, here's my card. All my information's on the card. Okay.
Detective Griggs decided to interview the friend that reported Cordell Richards missing.
Just have a seat right there. I understand that you're the one that reported Cordell Richards missing.
Yes, correct.
Okay, you're a friend of his?
Yeah, we've known each other for about a year and a half.
Okay.
According to his friend, Cordell Richards was a good man.
So, Grandpa, you look like you're good enough to go play some golf later, huh?
He was especially close to his grandparents, spending a lot of time with them since his grandfather had fallen ill. Cordell was divorced with 2 small children.
Thank you so much.
He worked at 2 jobs in order to support his family.
Everybody I talked to about Cordell Richards told me what a responsible person he was, a hard-working person. He worked several jobs, and his bosses always considered him highly reliable.
Investigators finally believed they were about to put a name on the victim that had remained anonymous for all these weeks. The name was Cordell Richards. In Okaloosa County, Florida, investigators struggled to identify a body that was not much more than a skeleton. The victim was badly burned and chained to a tree. After checking missing persons reports, the sheriff's department uncovered a possible match. For Forensic specialist Jan Johnson worked to identify the body using a single thumbprint.
This body was extremely decomposed and burned, and I was very shocked to find that there was still enough friction-rich detail to affect an identification. The fingerprints did match the fingerprints of the unidentified deceased, which was the skeletal remains of Cordell Richards. Investigator Griggs,
Fingerprints confirmed it. Cordell Richards was no longer a missing person. He was a murder victim.
That is correct.
Investigators returned to the Fort Walton Beach apartment complex where Cordell Richards had lived.
How you doing?
Hi.
Stan Griggs with the Sheriff's Office. Can we speak to you for a minute?
Sure.
Can we come on in?
Yeah.
Crystal Maestas answered the door.
What's going on?
I need to ask you a few questions about Cordell Richards.
Yeah, I rent a room for him.
You do? Which room?
The one right there.
Okay.
Forensic specialist Jan Johnson analyzed the apartment.
Okay, we have a search warrant for this apartment. Okay, because we're trying to locate Mr. Richards. Okay? Here, why don't you look it over?
Okay.
If you want to step outside, yes, ma'am. It was sparse, but there were some items left behind that, to me, the average person wouldn't leave behind. I knew Cordell Richards exclusively rode a bicycle. He didn't drive. A bicycle was there.
It was a small but important clue. Griggs wondered if Cordell was taken from his apartment by force.
A visual examination did not detect any blood evidence, so we decided to use luminol. Luminol is a presumptive test which is used on trace amounts of blood or blood that's been cleaned up. We sprayed the apartment, and there were 8 areas that did give a positive reaction for blood.
We've got a medium velocity spatter pattern here, it looks like. Also a couple of transfer stains. Looks like partial hand impressions.
After I documented the blood spatter, I then swabbed those areas, and those swabbings were sent to our laboratory for DNA analysis, and the blood came back as being conclusive as that of Cordell Richards.
Back in the lab, Johnson tested her theory of how the spatter got onto the wall. Using blood-soaked sponges and paper targets, she reproduced medium velocity spatter.
Medium velocity spatter is 1 millimeter to 3 millimeters in diameter and normally is associated with forceful impacts from blunt force trauma.
Okay, thank you.
They now had proof Cordell Richards was brutally beaten in his apartment.
Hey guys.
But in order to find his killer, they needed to find out why.
Have you heard of any robberies, home invasions, or burglaries?
Detectives checked for reported break-ins in the area.
I haven't heard anything like that.
There weren't any. In fact, in recent years, there were very few robberies in the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks. I didn't know why Cordell Richards was killed. We were looking at possible gambling debts. Possible debts like he may have owed. That was a possibility. It didn't seem like he was broken in. It was a haphazard thing.
Go through for a second.
Yeah.
Investigators canvassed the neighborhood near where the body was found.
Do you remember anything?
One woman recalled seeing an unfamiliar car parked near the woods about a month before.
Right.
And I noticed two teenagers coming from those woods over there.
Okay.
And
It was a gray hatchback. It had a missing window.
like a compact car, and one of the rear windows was punched out and was broken because there was a black trash bag covering it.
Okay.
The next day, investigators found Ronald Bell and Crystal Maestas as they were about to enter a gray car, matching the witness's description.
This your vehicle?
Yes, sir.
For this? Yes.
Bell confirmed the car belonged to him.
You know Cordell Richards?
Yes, I met him a few times and I've come to pick her up.
Do you know Cordell Richards, man?
Yeah, I rent a room from him.
Okay. What happened to your window on the vehicle?
Had a burglary a couple of weeks ago.
Evidence was mounting. Both teenagers knew Cordell Richards. Bell's car was spotted near the crime scene, and the victim's blood was found on the walls of the apartment Crystal shared with him.
I don't know where it's at.
It was enough to obtain a warrant to search the car. The car was searched and dusted for fingerprints. But no evidence was found connecting the vehicle to the victim. Next, investigators questioned officials at the school Ron Bell attended.
That you already saw in there?
I did note that he was gone from the 2nd to the 5th straight, and then quite a
He was
few days
absent
in the
several days in early
It's
February.
an unusual pattern for him.
Is it?
Come on in.
Ted Mazzo, a fellow student, confirmed Ronald Bell borrowed his truck twice during that time.
Let's see, you don't mind any answering any questions or anything I have today?
No, sir.
But Mazzo was not the only person to have information on Bell.
So, what can you tell me about Cordell Richards? He told us that Ron Bell asked him to decipher the password on a computer. He described the computer to me. He also described the layout of the interior of Cordell Richards' apartment.
How hard can it be?
Ron and Crystal were trying to log onto the internet, but they couldn't get past the password.
You're useless, Michael.
They asked Paul Martin to hack in.
Can't you get a ride home or something?
Try something else.
Yeah, you gotta help us with some bags.
Just keep working on that until we get there.
Paul noticed that all the files on the computer belonged to someone named Cordell.
Leave it alone, man. It's not gonna work.
Mike, it's not gonna work. Let's go.
He also said that Ron Bell disposed of some property from the apartment and some dumpsters. We searched dumpsters up and down the area, didn't find anything. Of course, by this time it'd been a couple months. We just had hopes that maybe something may have fallen out to the side. We did have some fortune where Cordell Richards' identification card was found near a dumpster by some telephone workers.
Although there was a wealth of circumstantial evidence, it wasn't enough.
Hey, Stan.
Yeah. Can you hang on 1 second? Okay, thank you.
We gotta leave.
Without a witness to tie it all together, they couldn't make a case.
Anybody that won't talk to anybody but us.
Okay, be right there. Hey, can I call you right back? Okay, thank you.
On March 17th, investigator Griggs received a startling message. Someone wanted to talk about the murder anonymously. "32-year-old Cordell Richards had been brutally murdered. His body was so badly burned, the medical examiner had trouble establishing the cause of death.
Thank you.
Just as it seemed the case would go cold, investigator Stan Griggs of the Okaloosa Sheriff's Department received a call. The caller was young and terrified. He said he had information about the case. but he only agreed to talk to investigators anonymously. The informant claimed Renee Lynx, a friend of Crystal's, was bragging about the murder.
He told us that Renee Lynx told him that she, Ron Bell, and Crystal Maestas were going to kill a guy because the guy had made advances on Crystal. She and Crystal were going to seduce him. Ron Bell would hit him over the head, knock him out, and they would dispose of his body.
It was a chilling story. Renee Lynx was called into the sheriff's department for questioning. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Renee Lynx admitted she helped Ronald Bell and Crystal Maestas abduct Cordell Richards and chain him to a tree in the woods. Despite beating and burning him, Cordell Richards was still alive. They purchased a meat cleaver at a discount store to finish him off.
All right, if you could, just go ahead and stand up, place your hands behind your back, because you're going to be arrested for murder.
Renee Lynx was only 15 years old when she was arrested for murder. Crystal Maestas and her boyfriend, Ronald Bell, were also arrested. Their fate hung on whether or not investigator Griggs could prove they purchased a meat cleaver at a discount store, as Renee Lynx had alleged.
This store has better than average surveillance cameras. We've got video of Ron Bell, Crystal Maestas, and Renee Lynx not only buying the cleaver, but returning it for a refund.
That's exactly what I need. I'm gonna have to take that from you.
When you see their faces on the video, this was not a bad happenstance that got out of hand. They're laughing on the video.
Is that the original tape?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is there any possible way you can trace the new owner of the meat cleaver?
Well, I have to check the bar.
They had records of where 3 cleavers had been returned. One was purchased by a credit card. They checked the inventory numbers and confirmed that that was the cleaver that was in question, the one that was used.
Yeah, that one right there, that one.
Investigators retrieved the meat cleaver as evidence.
Just get it out of here.
You sure you haven't used it?
In the lab, Jan Johnson analyzed the blade for blood. Ultimately, no blood stains were found. They would have to rely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony to convict the 3 teenagers who purchased the cleaver.
Crystal Maestas gave a very condensed version of the murder of Cordell Richards.
Crystal didn't always get along with her landlord.
Are you guys deaf or something? I can't even hear myself think in there.
Come join us. You saved your seat.
But she also knew Cordell was attracted to her. This made her boyfriend, Ronald Bell, very angry.
Is that seat for me?
He decided to do something about it. He knocked Cordell unconscious with a blunt object.
He was rolled up in a blanket, taken to a place in the western part of our county. He revived. They secured him to a tree. They began beating him with a baseball bat. They take turns hitting him on various parts of his body. He's still moaning. He's unconscious, but he's moaning. And he's starting to revive again. And it's then that Ron Bell pulls out some cigarette lighter fluid, soaks Cordell Richards with it, and lights him on fire. And they come back the next day. Cordell Richards is still alive. He's moaning for help. They go to a nearby department store, buy a meat cleaver, go out there, and they finish him off. I think the whole community was horrified that essentially children this age committed such a crime.
Crystal Maestas was tried and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ronald Bell is also serving a life sentence for his role in the murder. They were both tried as adults. Florida investigators combined science and determination to convict killers who were barely old enough to drive. But in Tennessee, when a child is the victim, a whole community comes together to track down a human predator. Montgomery County, Tennessee is located just 40 miles outside of Nashville. It's a place where life is simple and people feel safe.
Jackie! Jackie!
But on the afternoon of July 8, 1996, Jeannie Meyer learned the meaning of fear.
Jackie!
She was running late. Her son had a dental appointment, and her daughter Jackie was in the backyard picking blackberries.
Jackie! Jackie!
Jeannie's annoyance quickly turned to panic. Her daughter was only 9 years old, and now she was missing.
Jackie!
Can you describe her to me?
She's 9 years old. She had a pink shirt on, and she had her favorite
The Montgomery County Sheriff's Department responded.
Okay, I have a picture
Jackie
of her.
Beard was 4'7", with sandy blonde hair and blue eyes.
Okay.
She was wearing a pink shirt and jeans.
50 pounds. I don't know.
Jeannie tried to think of anything unusual that happened lately.
I have some other ones, but that's really.
She recalled seeing a stranger in the neighborhood.
Hey, good kick.
He was talking to Jackie and her friends.
Around here in the woods or in your playground? Hey, little girl. When you're playing around here, if you just look on the ground and you see something, you know, about 6 keys on a ring. Oh, yes, ma'am.
The man identified himself as Tommy Robertson, an undercover police officer.
And I lost my keys out here.
He said he'd lost his keys somewhere in the neighborhood.
To see if I could find them, and I saw you.
He wondered if the children had seen them.
If they had seen them around anywhere.
So your name is what again?
Yeah, it's Tommy, ma'am. Tommy Robertson. And I appreciate it if y'all see my keys around here anywhere, just call the police department.
Okay.
All right? Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate
Have a
it.
good day. They're her favorite shoes. They're her absolute
The Montgomery
favorite.
County police officer reassured Jeannie, more often than not, missing children come home.
We've got several officers right now.
In the meantime, they would do everything they could to find little Jackie.
All right, and we're going to keep this.
After a quick search of personnel records, investigator Billy Batson discovered there was no Tommy Robertson on the force. The optimism police felt now turned to concern, and every available officer was called in to find the missing girl.
Jackie! Jackie!
In Montgomery County, Tennessee, 9-year-old Jackie Beard was picking blackberries in her backyard.
Jackie!
10 minutes later, she disappeared.
Jackie!
Along with police, Montgomery County Rescue Squad coordinated the massive search effort, dispatching the K-9 unit and community volunteers. They combed the woods, searching for any sign of the missing girl. Billy Batson, an investigator with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, tried to remain optimistic.
It's a missing child at this point. We have initiated ground searches, including dogs and people who have volunteered to search the area looking for Jackie. Certainly our hopes were high that we would find her and that she would be safe and close to home.
Using the Myers house as their starting point, investigators fanned out. They searched the woods for hours. And with each passing hour, it seemed more likely that Jackie had been abducted. Children from the neighborhood were called into the sheriff's department and asked about the man posing as a police officer.
Can you look at these here and tell me which one looked close to you?
They gave descriptions of the stranger who called himself Tommy Robertson.
That one will work. This one? Let's capture that.
Feature by feature, a composite photo slowly emerged. In Jackie's neighborhood, the ground search intensified. There was no sign of the child or of the man police now suspected of abducting her. Police went door to door, hoping someone would provide them with any information regarding the little girl's whereabouts.
Hi, yes. How you doing? I'm Detective Shock. This is Officer Wood.
But nothing turned up.
We understand.
Investigators hoped media attention would bring them closer to finding Jackie and the stranger who police believed had taken her from her own backyard.
The next day, after this information had been in the newspaper, we started receiving several phone calls about an individual named Glenn Rogers who matched the description that was given in the paper, and that these people were concerned that he at least needed to be checked out.
Investigator Batson ran a background check. William Glenn Rogers had a long list of felony convictions. Police were dispatched to bring Rogers in for questioning. Rogers claimed that although he was in the Myers neighborhood the day Jackie disappeared, he never saw her. He was only looking for his keys.
Yes.
Police didn't believe him, and the results of a polygraph examination confirmed their suspicions.
No.
It indicated he was lying.
I've been out of work a long time.
Then he came up with a much different story.
Job that day.
He said when he couldn't find his keys, he returned to his car. As he put the car in reverse, he felt a bump, as if he'd hit a tree. Instead, he said he accidentally ran over a little girl, killing her instantly. Rogers panicked. He knew his record would make the accident seem suspicious.
So he didn't know what to do. He got in the car and drove. He came to a bridge which goes over the Cumberland River, not far from that scene, and he got out of the car, went to the passenger side, got Jackie from the car, and threw her over the side of the bridge into the Cumberland River.
Batson, along with Special Agent Brett Murray of the FBI, were more than a little skeptical.
The interview right after the polygraph test, I did not believe. I did believe the fact that he was responsible for her disappearance, which he basically said he was, but the facts surrounding how she disappeared were not something that we believed. We knew there was more to the story. The key then was to try to find Jackie.
Rogers was placed under arrest while investigators checked out his story. The Montgomery County Rescue Squad and surrounding county squads were dispatched to the Cumberland River. They searched for much-needed physical evidence if they hoped to disprove Rogers' story that Jackie's death was an accident.
Glenn Rogers has confessed that he was responsible for Jackie Beard's death, and he said in his statement that he took her body and threw it off the bridge, the Zinc Plant Road that crosses Cumberland River. And at this time we've initiated dragging operations. If in fact that's true, we hope to recover her body.
Despite an exhaustive search, investigators came away empty-handed. There was no sign of Jackie. Police headed back to their only hope, the one person who knew where to find her. That man was Glenn Rogers, and this time they were determined to get to the truth. In Tennessee, a 9-year-old girl had been missing for 3 days. William Glenn Rogers, a convicted felon, claimed he accidentally hit Jackie Beard with his car. He said he panicked, then dumped her body in a river. A search team dragged the Cumberland River, but there was no sign of Jackie Beard's body. Investigators suspected Rogers was lying.
Oh, yeah, let me call you back.
They called his wife in for questioning.
Detective shot. Hi, Mrs. Rogers.
Hello.
She admitted that on the night of July 8th, her husband left the house for several hours.
That's correct. He was about 3 hours late, actually.
His wife remembered the incident because she was angry.
He was so late.
Rogers came home late that night.
Bill, do you know how late it is? Where have you
She noticed he had mud on his pants and a spot of blood on his shirt. The car was muddy too. Rogers made a vague excuse. He said he'd been walking through the woods.
She was waiting for the car to take her grandkids to a school function, so she remembered that. She also indicated that at some point she noticed some small smeared fingerprints on the passenger side of his car on the windshield.
Detective Batson was determined to find out how those tiny fingerprints got there and whether they proved Jackie Beard was still alive when Rogers put her in the car. For that, he needed a closer look at the suspect's car. A forensic team searched every inch of the vehicle. For an older car, it was suspiciously clean. Rogers had done a thorough job of detailing his car. So thorough, there wasn't a shred of evidence that Jackie Beard had ever been inside it.
If there's anything that you want to
Frustrated, Batson questioned Rogers about the discrepancies between his statement and his wife's.
Well, now, you know, I've been thinking about this thing. Now, there is something I forgot about.
Rogers quickly changed his story to match hers. Without physical evidence or even a body, the sheriff's department couldn't prove him wrong. 4 months to the day, on November 8th, police in nearby Stewart County received a crucial call. A deer hunter reported seeing human skeletal remains at the Land Between the Lakes Wildlife and Recreation Area.
245 right there, 10-4.
The call was relayed to investigator Batson.
Can you give me a description? The agent in charge down there had heard about this case, and he called me and described to me the clothing that they had found down there, and I knew at that point that it was possibly Jackie.
Investigators and canine units converged on the national park, along with agents of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The combined team launched an intensive search to recover the remains. Investigators found a skull. Several strands of sandy blonde hair were still attached. Not far away, they discovered a clump of similar hair. Children's clothing was recovered and bagged as evidence. Dr. Murray Marks led a team of anthropologists from the University of Tennessee in a controlled search and recovery effort.
A crime scene, a forensic scene, is like an archaeological site. There's only one chance to excavate it. The crime scene was in a rural area, heavily wooded, though all the leaves were down. Many times that makes the recovery a little bit more difficult. We found elements scattered in a pretty wide area. And then we systematically go through looking at, for one thing, different layers of leaves. We can tell the seasonality. If the bones are on top of the leaves, obviously, that's happened after they fell. If they're under the leaf or under 2 or 3 layers of leaves, we know how many seasons have gone by. The skeletal remains were under 1 or 2 layers of leaves, so we knew some time had passed.
To learn more, Dr. Marks needed to analyze the skeletal remains. He returned to the forensic anthropology lab at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
We knew that we had a subadult individual. Prior to 20 years of age, you can look at dental development and the way the long bones grow and how long they are. So you can make an assessment of age relatively easy. Sex is difficult to ascertain prior to puberty. Prior to puberty, we cannot make an assessment of sex in skeletal remains. So we had no idea we were dealing with a female or a male.
The length of the long bones revealed that the victim was young, between the ages of 7 and 9.
271.
We're going to be interested.
Dr. Marks determined the remains were consistent with the little girls.
Pre-20 years, we're going to look at dental development.
The child had died 3 to 9 months ago, well within the time Jackie Beard disappeared.
We didn't see cut marks that are indicative of sharp force trauma. We didn't see bludgeoning or blunt force trauma, no fracture to bone. We didn't find the fragile bones in the neck that would tell us about strangulation. There was no evidence on the bone that told us anything about a cause or manner of death.
Now, investigators could only hope to make a positive identification.
We also did mitochondrial DNA, comparing the DNA of Jackie with her mother, and that was a match.
Identifying the remains was an important step. But Batson was missing the physical evidence needed to link William Glenn Rogers to the death of Jackie Beard. Once again, science provided answers.
When her clothing was collected, it was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for further analysis. When they examined the clothing, they found some fibers on Jackie's clothing that they really couldn't identify. Fibers of this type were also found in Glenn Rogers' car.
But they didn't match the car's carpet fibers. Forensic investigators went back to Rogers' house and collected fibers from his carpet. The carpet fibers matched those on Jackie's clothing. Rogers had tracked the fibers into his car. The match conclusively placed Jackie inside the suspect's car.
Did you find your keys?
Hey, little girl. Yeah,
Montgomery County investigators theorized that on July 8, 1996, Glenn Rogers lured 9-year-old Jackie into his car by posing as a trusted figure, a police officer. He then drove to a secluded spot where he raped and killed her. He later hid her body in a secluded area in Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area. In January of 2000, William Glenn Rogers was convicted of the abduction, rape, and murder of Jackie Beard. At his sentencing hearing, Jackie's mother spoke of her loss.
Jackie looked up to me more than anyone else, and I couldn't do the most important thing I would ever do in my life. I couldn't save her from a horrible situation. I cannot bring myself to imagine what she must have had to go through. My beautiful baby, scared, taken by force, molested, and then killed by a man she thought was a safe person.
William Glenn Rogers was sentenced to death. To cover their tracks, some killers go to great lengths to hide their vicious acts of violence. But in the end, most efforts fail. Forensic science can uncover the smallest clue, because even the most determined killer cannot commit the perfect crime.